"Do not move," the deep voice said from somewhere beyond the snow. "The wolves only kneel for one person." Megan Carter did not understand why everyone around her suddenly looked terrified. Wind tore across the frozen pack square hard enough to sting her cheeks, while snow gathered along the edges of her worn coat. She stood perfectly still beneath the yellow glow of iron lanterns, breath trembling in the winter air, fingers numb from cold and fear. Around her, dozens of wolves from the Crescent Ridge pack had gone silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that came right before something dangerous arrived. For enormous black wolves stood in a half-circle around her, bodies impossibly large against the falling snow, dark fur moving gently beneath the storm wind. Golden eyes watched everyone else with low, terrifying patience. Not her. Never her. Somehow, impossibly, they stood facing outward as though protecting her. Like she mattered. Like she belonged to them. Megan swallowed hard, heart beating painfully against her ribs. 20 minutes ago, the entire pack had stood here mocking her. Calling her weak. Worthless. A rejected Omega who should have left town months ago. Now nobody wanted to stand within 20 feet of her. Even Alpha Brandon Hayes looked uneasy. His usual confidence gone. "This is your fault," Brandon had shouted only moments ago, snow collecting on his expensive black coat while the crowd watched with eager cruelty. "You brought dangerous animals near our territory." Dangerous animals. Megan almost laughed at the unfairness of it. Because only 3 weeks earlier, there had been nothing dangerous about the tiny black wolf she found behind her woodshed. Nothing except the way loneliness had made her care too quickly. The memory came back suddenly, soft against the cold. 3 weeks earlier. Before the shouting. Before humiliation. Before wolves taller than motorcycles stood guard around her like living shadows. Back when winter felt smaller somehow. The first snowfall had arrived early that year. Thick, wet flakes covering the old pine trees behind Megan's cabin near the edge of pack territory. Her place barely deserved the word cabin. More like an abandoned hunting shed someone patched together badly. 1 bedroom. A tiny wood stove that groaned louder than it heated. Windows old enough to whistle when wind slipped through the cracks. But it was hers. Or close enough. After her rejection ceremony 11 months ago, nobody wanted the inconvenience of keeping an unwanted Omega near the center of town. Easier to move her somewhere forgotten. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere nobody needed to look at disappointment every day. Megan adjusted the grocery sack against her hip as boots crunched through 6 inches of fresh snow. Dinner tonight looked pathetic even by normal standards. 1 loaf of discounted bread. Canned soup. Cheap tea bags she stretched too long between cups. Her paycheck from the kitchen barely covered heat. Some nights she skipped meals without thinking too hard about it. Hunger eventually became routine. Like loneliness. Like silence. Wind howled sharply through the trees just as she reached the porch steps. Then came the sound. Small. Weak. Almost swallowed by snow. A soft cry. Megan stopped instantly. Listened again. Nothing except wind. She frowned slightly. Probably imagination. Winter played tricks on tired people. Another sound came moments later. Softer this time. Closer. Somewhere behind the cabin. Megan hesitated only a second before setting groceries beside the door. "Hello," she called quietly, already feeling ridiculous. No answer. Just another tiny sound. Hurt. Frightened somehow. Her boots slipped slightly through snow as she walked around the back of the cabin toward the old woodshed half buried beneath winter drifts. A loose board knocked gently against frozen wood nearby. Then she saw it. Beneath the broken crate near stacked firewood sat something small and dark, barely moving beneath a layer of melting snow. Megan froze. Wolf pup. Tiny. Black fur soaked completely through. One paw tucked awkwardly beneath trembling body. Golden eyes barely open. Too young to survive alone. Too weak even to growl properly. The little thing tried anyway. Small sound. More sad than threatening. Megan crouched carefully, cold snow soaking through jeans almost immediately. "Oh no," she whispered softly. The pup flinched. Tried to move backward. Failed. Her chest tightened painfully. Whoever lost this little creature had not been looking hard enough. Or maybe nobody came at all. She understood that feeling too well. The pup shivered violently. Megan looked toward the forest. Darkness already settling between pine trees. No mother wolf. No pack nearby. Nothing except growing cold. Logic told her to leave it alone. Wolves belonged in forests, not cabins. Especially black wolves. Rare enough to make people nervous. Dangerous enough to bring trouble if discovered. But logic had never been very good at surviving loneliness. Megan slowly removed her scarf. Old wool. Slightly worn at the edges. The warmest thing she owned. I know, she whispered gently while carefully reaching closer. You probably hate me already. The pup let out another weak sound, too tired to protest much anymore. Snow gathered along tiny ears. Megan exhaled shakily through the cold. Then, before common sense could stop her, she wrapped the trembling little wolf inside her scarf and pulled him gently against her chest. Warmth met freezing fur almost instantly. Tiny heartbeat. Still fighting. Still alive. The pup did not bite. Did not struggle. Instead, after one shaky breath, he curled closer against her coat like he had already decided something important. Megan looked toward the empty woods one last time. Nobody came. Nobody called for him. Snow kept falling harder. Somewhere deep. The little black wolf refused to leave her side after that night. Not once. Not even when common sense quietly begged Megan Carter to put him back where he belonged. The first morning arrived colder than expected, pale winter sunlight slipping weakly through cracked cabin windows while wind rattled loose boards outside. Megan woke to something warm pressed against her stomach beneath two worn blankets. For one confused second, she forgot. Then golden eyes blinked slowly up at her. Quiet. Careful. Watching. The tiny wolf had somehow climbed onto the bed during the night. Snowmelt had dried unevenly through dark fur, leaving soft patches sticking up in strange directions. He looked less intimidating this morning. More exhausted than dangerous. Smaller too. The kind of small that made people instinctively lower their voice. Megan pushed herself up slowly, old mattress springs groaning beneath her weight. You really stayed, she whispered softly. The pup tilted his head once. Tiny movement. Curious somehow. His tail thumped weakly against the blanket. Megan laughed before she could stop herself. Strange sound. Unfamiliar lately. Quiet laughter had not visited this cabin much in the past year. Not after rejection. Not after loneliness settled into the walls like winter itself. She reached carefully toward him. You know I cannot keep you forever, right? The pup blinked slowly. No reaction. Instead, he leaned slightly closer until cold nose pressed gently against her wrist. Like he had already made up his mind about her. Dangerous thing, attachment. Megan knew better than most. Still, she sighed quietly and rubbed a hand through messy brown hair before glancing toward the nearly empty kitchen counter. Breakfast looked depressing. Half a loaf of bread. Cheap canned soup left from yesterday. 2 eggs she had been saving for the weekend. Rent came first. Heat second. Food usually somewhere after that. Yet somehow, without thinking too hard, Megan tore half the bread into smaller pieces and crouched beside the wood stove. I hope wolves like stale bread, she said quietly. The pup stared, then sniffed cautiously. Suspicious expression somehow. Megan narrowed her eyes. Listen, little guy, this is all we have. The pup looked unimpressed. She almost laughed again. Wow. Judgy already. Eventually, after enough encouragement, he ate carefully from her hand. Slow at first. Then faster. Hungrier than he wanted to admit. Megan watched him quietly, chest tightening in that familiar uncomfortable way kindness always arrived. The dangerous kind. The kind that made lonely people care too much too quickly. Outside, snow piled deeper along the porch while distant howls drifted softly through the forest. Strange thing though. Every time the sound came closer, the pup stopped eating and listened. Ears lifted. Body still. Alert in a way too intelligent for something so young. Then silence again. Like whoever waited outside never crossed closer. By afternoon, Megan bundled herself into an old winter coat and headed toward the pack kitchen for work. The pup remained hidden beneath blankets near the stove. Or at least, that was the plan. "Stay here," she whispered while kneeling near the bed. "Please do not destroy the house." Golden eyes stared back at her. Calm. Almost offended. "You are tiny," Megan added softly. "Tiny things make bad decisions." The pup sneezed directly at her. She smiled despite herself. Strange again. Smiling felt unfamiliar lately. Before leaving, she tore another piece of bread into a bowl beside water and tucked the blanket closer around him. "I will be back before dark." His eyes followed her all the way to the door. The kitchen smelled like onions and disappointment. Same as always. Crescent Ridge Pack never cared much about omegas after they stopped being useful. Especially rejected ones. Megan spent hours chopping vegetables while others whispered nearby just quietly enough to hear. Still living in that shack? Maybe she will finally leave town. I heard Brandon rejected her because her wolf was weak. She kept working. Always working. Easier than reacting. Easier than letting humiliation sink deeper. One of the younger kitchen girls bumped her shoulder gently near sunset. "You okay?" Megan smiled politely. Small smile. Practice smile. "Fine." Everyone always said fine when life felt unbearable. By the time she walked home, darkness already swallowed most of the forest path. Snow crunched beneath boots while cold slipped through her coat too easily. Strange thing though. Halfway back to the cabin, Megan noticed tracks beside hers. Huge wolf tracks. Far too large for normal territory wolves. Fresh. For separate sets disappearing into trees near her house. Her stomach tightened slightly. Uneasy feelings settled low in her chest. Maybe wild wolves passed through. Maybe nothing. Still, she quickened her pace. "Please be okay," she whispered softly without realizing who she meant. The cabin lights flickered warmly through frosted windows when she arrived. Relief came too quickly. Until she opened the door. The pup sat near the stove exactly where she left him. Calm. Safe. Except now something else rested beside him. A fresh deer bone far too large for something his size to drag inside. Megan stopped completely. "Okay," she whispered slowly. "That is concerning." The little wolf looked up at her calmly, tail moving once against the floor like nothing unusual had happened at all. Then, somewhere beyond the trees outside, low in the dark where snow swallowed sound, something large let out a single quiet howl. Not threatening. Waiting. Watching. And somehow, for the first time in months, Megan no longer felt completely alone. Before we continue, if stories about second chances and unexpected loyalty mean something to you, make sure to like and subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. The little black wolf started following her everywhere after that. Not openly. Not at first. Just enough to make Megan Carter wonder if loneliness had finally started inventing company. 3 mornings after the strange deer bone appeared beside the stove, she woke to find fresh snow piled halfway up the cabin windows and tiny paw prints circling the bed like someone had spent the entire night guarding her sleep. The pup sat near the front door waiting quietly, golden eyes watching every movement while pale winter sunlight stretched weakly across worn wooden floors. "You know," Megan said softly while pulling thick socks over freezing feet, "most pets are supposed to behave badly before becoming this clingy." The pup tilted his head once. Calm. Patient. Slightly offended somehow. He had grown noticeably in only days. Too quickly. Bigger shoulders. Longer legs. For darker now, almost midnight black whenever firelight touched it. Wolves did not grow this fast. At least, normal wolves did not. Megan noticed. She simply chose not to think too hard about it. Because thinking too hard usually ruined good things. And this little creature, strange as he was, had somehow made the cabin feel less empty. She tore stale bread into smaller pieces while heating canned soup over the stove. Same breakfast. Same routine. Yet somehow mornings felt different now. Quieter in a good way. Less lonely. The pup sat beside her chair while she ate, pretending not to stare at the food in her hands. "You are terrible at hiding hunger," she said softly. Golden eyes blinked slowly. Innocent expression. Complete lie. Megan laughed under her breath before sliding half her sandwich toward him. Do not get used to this. He absolutely got used to it. By the end of the week, the little wolf somehow understood her schedule better than she did. Every morning he followed her to the cabin door, waiting until she wrapped herself in her old winter coat before pacing near the porch steps. Every evening, without fail, he sat waiting near the window before she arrived home. Like he always knew exactly when she returned. Like he listened for her footsteps. Strange thing though. Megan stopped feeling nervous walking home through the woods. Not anymore. Even on the darkest nights, she noticed enormous wolf tracks nearby. Never too close. Always watching from deeper snow near the trees. For separate sets. Massive. Impossible to ignore now. Once, halfway home after work, she glanced back and caught movement between pine trunks. Something huge. Dark fur disappearing silently into forest shadows. Watching. Not threatening. Protective somehow. It should have frightened her. Instead, oddly enough, it made the long walk feel safer. The packed kitchen felt worse lately. Rumors moved quickly in small towns and lonely women always became easy entertainment. Megan heard whispers every day while chopping vegetables near the ovens. Still living out there all alone? Heard she talks to herself now. Maybe rejection finally broke her. Brandon Hayes never looked directly at her anymore. Strange after everything. Before rejection, he had smiled at her in crowded rooms. Held doors open. Made promises people were foolish enough to believe at 23. Then came the public rejection ceremony. One sentence. One moment. Entire future gone. I reject Megan Carter as my mate. Just like that. Since then, she became something uncomfortable for people to look at too long. A reminder that sometimes wolves simply stopped choosing kindness. Yet somehow, every night when she returned home, golden eyes waited by the stove like none of that mattered. Like she still belonged somewhere. You are weird, Megan whispered one evening while drying snow from his fur with an old towel. You know that? The pup pressed lightly against her knee. Warm. Quiet. Familiar already. She smiled before realizing she had done it again. Smiling. Actual smiling. Dangerous thing. Hope. Outside, wind shook pine trees hard enough to scrape branches against the cabin roof. Then came another sound. Low. Distant. A howl. Longer this time. Closer too. The pup immediately stood. Ears lifting. Body suddenly still in a way that made him look older somehow. Smarter. More serious. Megan frowned slightly. Your friends again? She asked softly. The pup walked toward the front door slowly. Waited. Listening. Then, after several long seconds, he relaxed and returned to lie beside her feet like nothing happened. Strange behavior. Stranger still because when Megan opened the door briefly before bed, fresh tracks circled the cabin again. Huge ones. Deep in snow. For wolves. Same as before. One set stopped directly beneath her bedroom window. Guarding position maybe. Impossible thought. Ridiculous thought. Yet something about it made warmth settle quietly in her chest. For the first time in months, somebody seemed to care whether she came home safe. Even if they had 4 paws and refused introductions. That night sleep arrived easier than usual. Snow falling softly beyond old windows. Fire crackling low in the stove. Warm black fur curled near her feet beneath blankets. Then sometime after midnight, Megan stirred awake to movement outside. Heavy movement. Not threatening. Large. Careful. She sat up slowly. Frost lining window edges. Silence stretching strangely across the forest. The pup was gone. Front door slightly open. Cold air drifting inside. Megan frowned immediately, heart tightening unexpectedly. Little guy, she whispered softly into the dark. No answer. Only distant shadows moving between trees. Then, from somewhere far beyond the forest line, 4 glowing pairs of golden eyes appeared briefly in the dark before disappearing again like they had never been there at all. The little black wolf returned just before sunrise like nothing unusual had happened. Megan Carter woke curled beneath blankets to the soft sound of paws crossing old wooden floors and immediately sat upright. Pale morning light stretched weakly through frost-covered windows while cold air still lingered near the slightly open front door. There he was, calm as ever. Dark fur dusted lightly with snow. Golden eyes watching her from beside the stove like disappearing into the woods in the middle of the night required absolutely no explanation. Megan pressed one hand against her chest before exhaling slowly. Relief came embarrassingly fast. "You cannot keep doing that," she whispered, voice rough from sleep. "Do you understand how worried I was?" The little wolf tilted his head once before walking closer. No apology. No guilt. Just quiet certainty. He nudged lightly against the side of the bed and sat beside her like he belonged there. Like he had always belonged there. Megan sighed softly and reached down, fingers brushing through thick dark fur. Warmer than before. Softer too. Stranger still, he had grown again overnight. Bigger shoulders. Taller frame. Too large now to be mistaken for anything ordinary. "You are either the fastest growing wolf in." Winter settled deeper around the cabin after that night, heavy and quiet, like the forest had decided to hold its breath. Megan Carter noticed the change first in the silence. Birds stopped coming near the porch. Deer no longer crossed behind the woodshed. Even the wind felt different somehow, slower when it passed through the pine trees surrounding her small home near the edge of Crescent Ridge territory. Yet strangely, she felt safer than she had in months. Maybe years. The little black wolf had become impossible to ignore now. No longer small enough to fit comfortably beside the stove. No longer fragile. 5 weeks after she first wrapped him inside her old scarf, he stood nearly to her waist whenever he stretched beside the door. Thick midnight fur caught pale morning light like moving shadows, and those golden eyes seemed far too intelligent for an animal his age. If he even had an age. Megan stopped pretending he was ordinary. She just had not figured out what extraordinary meant yet. "You are becoming expensive," she whispered one snowy morning while tearing the last of her sandwich into uneven pieces. "You eat like somebody twice your size." The wolf sat beside the kitchen table calmly, watching every movement with impossible patience. Tail moving once against old wooden floors. Completely unapologetic. Megan sighed dramatically before sliding half the food toward him anyway. "This is exactly how people end up broke." He leaned gently against her leg in response. Warm. Familiar now. Her chest tightened unexpectedly. Strange how quickly loneliness could disappear when something waited for you to come home. Strange too how much quieter pain became when someone listened without asking questions. Work felt worse lately. Whispers moved faster than winter storms through Crescent Ridge. Megan noticed people watching her differently now. Curious. Suspicious. The kitchen staff stopped lowering their voices enough whenever she walked past. Someone said they heard wolves near her cabin. Black wolves. No normal pack runs black wolves. Maybe she is hiding something. Megan kept chopping vegetables. Kept her head down. Easier than explaining something she barely understood herself. Because truthfully, she had started noticing strange things too. Every single night fresh tracks appeared around the cabin. For enormous sets circling the property before sunrise. Never crossing onto the porch. Never coming too close. Just there. Waiting. Watching. Guarding. And every morning, the little wolf returned home smelling faintly of snow and pine like he had been somewhere important. One evening after work, Megan arrived to find fresh firewood stacked neatly beside the cabin door. Perfectly arranged. Dry too. Better wood than she could afford herself. She stood frozen on the porch for several long seconds. "Okay," she whispered softly. "That is unsettling." The wolf sat behind her near the doorway, looking deeply unconcerned. Like mysterious firewood deliveries happened all the time. "Did you suddenly get very helpful friends?" Golden eyes blinked slowly. No answer. Of course. Later that night, she noticed something else. Near the porch stairs sat a wrapped bundle of fresh venison, untouched by snow despite heavy weather. No footprints nearby except wolf tracks. Huge ones. Megan stared at it for nearly a full minute before laughing quietly to herself. Either somebody feels bad for me, she whispered, or I accidentally joined the strangest neighborhood in America. Yet beneath the humor sat unease she could not fully explain. Wolves did not protect people like this. Not strangers. Especially not rejected omegas nobody else wanted around. Something felt off. Bigger somehow. Like she stood near the edge of understanding without realizing it. 3 days later, everything shifted. Megan was halfway through her kitchen shift when the back doors slammed open hard enough to startle everyone inside. Cold air rushed through the room. Alpha Brandon Hayes entered first, expression already irritated. Behind him stood 2 patrol wolves wearing serious expressions Megan immediately disliked. "Megan Carter," Brandon said sharply, voice carrying too easily through the kitchen. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Same humiliation. Different day. Megan slowly lowered the knife in her hand. "Yes." Brandon crossed his arms. "There have been repeated reports of dangerous wolves near your cabin." Silence spread instantly. Someone nearby whispered her name under their breath. Megan felt heat rise uncomfortably in her chest. "I live near the woods," she answered quietly. "There are always wolves." Brandon stepped closer. "Not these wolves." Something sharp entered his voice. Suspicion maybe. Fear. "Large black wolves have been spotted around your property for weeks." Megan swallowed carefully. Because technically that part was true. "I do not know anything about that," she said honestly. Mostly honestly. Brandon narrowed his eyes. "Then maybe we'll not mind a search." The kitchen fell painfully silent. Megan's stomach dropped immediately. Cabin. The wolf. Fear arrived cold and sudden. Because whatever strange mystery surrounded him, one thing felt terrifyingly clear. If Brandon found him, things would not end kindly. Not for her. Not for the creature who had somehow become the closest thing to family she had left. Brandon gestured toward the door. "Tomorrow morning," he said coldly. "We inspect your property." Megan stood frozen while the room watched quietly. Judgment already forming. Suspicion spreading fast. Outside, snow fell harder against dark windows. Somewhere deep in the forest beyond Crescent Ridge, something unseen let out one long low howl that rolled through the mountains like a warning no one else inside seemed able to hear. The walk home felt longer than usual that night. Snow pressed heavily against the forest path while cold slipped through Megan Carter's coat like winter itself had learned where loneliness lived. Her boots crunched softly through fresh powder, grocery bag hanging lighter than she wished from one tired hand. Tomorrow morning. Brandon's words stayed sharp in her mind. A search. Her cabin. The wolf. Fear settled low and uncomfortable beneath her ribs. Not loud fear. Quiet fear. The kind that sat still and waited. Megan glanced toward the tree line more than once while walking home. The woods felt strange tonight. Too quiet. No birds. No distant movement. Just wind threading softly through dark pines and that familiar feeling she could never explain anymore. Watching. Like unseen eyes followed her steps from somewhere deeper between the trees. Yet strangely, she did not feel threatened. Not exactly. Protected maybe. Which somehow felt even stranger. By the time the cabin came into view, smoke curled weakly from the chimney into dark winter sky. Warm light glowed through frosted windows. Relief arrived too quickly. Familiar now. Dangerous too. Because somewhere along the way, this tiny creature she never meant to keep had become home. "Please be there," she whispered quietly before climbing porch steps. She pushed open the door fast enough for cold air to rush inside. The wolf stood immediately from beside the stove. Waiting. Golden eyes lifting toward her like he had counted every minute until she returned. Megan exhaled hard, tension easing before she could stop it. "You really do wait for me," she whispered softly. The wolf crossed the room in seconds and nudged gently against her side hard enough to nearly push her backward. Bigger again. Definitely bigger. At this point, he looked less like a pup and more like something halfway grown into power he had not realized belonged to him yet. Thick midnight fur. Broad shoulders. Quiet confidence in every movement. Megan crouched beside him anyway, fingers moving gently through dark fur. "Okay," she said softly. We have a problem. Golden eyes stayed fixed on her face. Listening somehow. Too understanding. Too aware. She stood slowly and set groceries onto the counter before beginning dinner with nervous hands. Cheap soup again. Half a sandwich split unevenly. The wolf remained nearby while she cooked, never far enough to lose sight of her. Usually comforting. Tonight, heartbreaking. Because for the first time since finding him, Megan allowed herself to think something terrifying. Tomorrow might be the last day he stayed here. Brandon would find him. Brandon always looked for reasons to punish weakness. A rejected Omega hiding a strange wolf near pack borders? That story would spread fast. I do not know what to do, she admitted quietly while stirring soup. The wolf rested beside the stove, but lifted his head immediately when she spoke. I cannot let them take you. Her voice cracked unexpectedly. She laughed softly afterward, embarrassed by herself. Which is ridiculous, because technically you are not mine. Silence followed. Only crackling firewood and wind brushing against old cabin walls. Then, slowly, the wolf stood and crossed the room again. He stopped directly beside her chair and rested his head lightly against her knee. Warm. Familiar. Comforting in ways words stopped reaching months ago. Megan swallowed hard. You really are terrible timing, she whispered. I was getting used to not feeling alone. Golden eyes never moved from hers. Something shifted quietly in the room then. Strange feeling. Like understanding passed between them without language. Outside, somewhere far beyond the cabin, a long low howl drifted through the mountains. Deep. Powerful. Close enough now to make cabin windows tremble faintly. The wolf lifted his head instantly. Body suddenly still. Alert. Listening. Megan frowned. Them again, she asked quietly. Another howl answered from farther left. Then another. Different directions. Coordinated somehow. The wolf moved toward the front door. Waited there. Still listening. Megan stood slowly beside him. Fear tightened again. Because this no longer felt random. For wolves. Every night. Same pattern. Same distance. Watching. Waiting. Guarding. She reached carefully toward the doorknob and cracked the door open. Cold air swept inside immediately. Snow drifted softly beneath moonlight. Fresh tracks covered the yard already. Massive ones. For separate wolves standing just beyond tree line where darkness swallowed detail. Too far to see clearly. Close enough to feel. Golden eyes reflected briefly from the woods before disappearing. Megan stared hard into shadows. Heart beating unevenly now. Who are you? She whispered into the cold. No answer came. Only silence. Then the wolf beside her stepped forward unexpectedly and released a soft sound low in his throat. Not threatening. Familiar somehow. Like greeting. Like family. Seconds later, movement shifted between trees. For massive shapes turned slowly before disappearing deeper into the forest without sound. Gone. Just like that. Megan closed the door carefully, pulse still racing. Okay, she whispered to herself. This is officially strange. She turned back toward the wolf. Do you want to explain literally any of this? He blinked once. Calm. Completely unconcerned. Then, to Megan's surprise, he walked back toward the bed instead of dinner. Curled up quietly near blankets. Tired somehow. She watched him for a long moment. Something felt different tonight. Heavy. Final almost. Uneasy enough to settle deep in her chest. Later, sometime after midnight, Megan woke suddenly without knowing why. Silence stretched strangely across the cabin. Too still. No soft breathing near the stove. No familiar warmth nearby. Her stomach dropped immediately. Empty floorboards. Open front door. Snow blowing softly inside. The wolf was gone. This time, somehow, it felt different. Megan Carter threw the blanket aside so quickly it nearly slipped onto the floor. Cold air drifted through the open front door in slow waves, carrying the sharp smell of pine and fresh snow into the cabin. Her pulse jumped hard enough to hurt. No, she whispered immediately, voice rough with panic. She had not meant to feel this strongly. Not again. Not something else leaving. The empty space beside the stove looked wrong somehow. Too quiet. Too still. Only hours ago dark fur rested there, warm and familiar beneath firelight. Now nothing remained except faint paw prints leading toward the door already filling with blown snow. Megan pulled her coat over thin pajamas without thinking twice. Boots half unlaced. Hair messy. Hands shaking from cold or fear, maybe both. Outside, winter swallowed everything. Snow stretched untouched beneath pale moonlight while wind moved softly between frozen trees. The tracks stood out immediately. Large now. Much larger than before. No longer the uneven prints of a growing pup. These belonged to something powerful. Something that moved with certainty. Megan swallowed hard before stepping off the porch. "Hey," she called softly into the dark. "Come back." Nothing answered. Only wind. Yet strange unease sat heavily in the woods tonight. Like silence itself had become crowded. Her boots followed tracks through fresh snow toward the tree line. 15 feet. 20. 30. Then she stopped. For additional sets surrounded the larger tracks. Massive wolf prints cutting through snow from different directions. Same pattern as always. The unseen guardians. Except tonight something looked different. They no longer circled the cabin. Instead, every track faced outward. Protective formation. Like they had escorted someone away. Or protected something important leaving. Megan stood very still, cold biting through her coat now. "You're out there, are you not?" she whispered quietly. Somewhere deeper in the forest, branches shifted. Heavy movement. Too large for ordinary wolves. Her breath caught instantly. Then silence again. Watching. Waiting. Not dangerous somehow. Yet impossibly distant now. Like something had already changed. Eventually cold forced her back inside. Sleep never returned. She sat near the stove wrapped in blankets, while morning slowly arrived through gray winter light, eyes drifting repeatedly toward the empty doorway. Strange thing about loneliness. It became unbearable again the moment someone interrupted it. By sunrise the cabin felt painfully quiet. No paws crossing floorboards. No golden eyes watching breakfast preparation. No silent companion waiting near the stove pretending not to beg for food. Megan stared too long at the extra sandwich she accidentally made before quietly setting half aside anyway. Habit already forming. Ridiculous habit. Stupid habit. She should have expected this. Wolves belonged in forests. Not cabins. Not kitchens. Not lonely women learning to smile again. Yet the ache still arrived anyway. Sharp and unfair. Worse still because Brandon would arrive soon. Search party. Judgment. More humiliation. Around 9 o'clock heavy truck tires crunched through snow outside. Megan straightened immediately, stomach tightening. Voices followed. Male voices. Confident ones. The kind belonging to people who already believed they were right. Brandon Hayes knocked once before opening the door without waiting for permission. Same arrogance. Same cold expression. 2 patrol wolves followed behind him into the cabin. Warmth disappeared instantly. "Well," Brandon said while looking around slowly. "This place smells interesting." Megan folded her arms tightly. "You do not live here." Brandon ignored that. His eyes moved toward the stove. Toward blankets. Toward food still sitting untouched near the floor. Suspicion sharpened immediately. "Where is it?" Megan forced calm into her voice. "Where is what?" "The wolf." Silence stretched awkwardly. Because technically she did not know anymore. Brandon moved farther inside, glancing toward the back room. People saw movement around here all month. One patrol wolf stepped toward the porch and paused suddenly. "Alpha," he said quietly. Brandon turned immediately. "What?" The patrol wolf pointed toward fresh snow outside the cabin. Megan stepped closer without meaning to. Huge tracks covered the clearing. Fresh. Much fresher than last night. For massive wolves standing directly around the cabin sometime before sunrise. Deep paw prints. Protective spacing. Impossible to miss. Brandon's expression shifted. "Uneasy now." "No normal wolves are this size," one patrol wolf whispered quietly. Then another strange detail emerged. No tracks approached the porch. None at all. Instead, all 4 sets stopped facing outward from the cabin like guards stationed through the night. Brandon stepped outside slowly, eyes narrowing. What exactly have you been hiding? Megan looked down at Snow. At the tracks. At the strange proof someone or something had stood watch while she slept. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. Because somehow this felt less like abandonment and more like goodbye. Then movement came suddenly from the tree line. Everyone froze. For enormous shadows stood partially hidden between snow-covered pines. Black wolves. Larger than anything Megan had ever imagined. Golden eyes reflecting faintly beneath morning light. Silent. Watching. One patrol wolf stepped backward immediately. Brandon went still. The wolves did not move closer. Did not threaten. Violet did not realize the room had gone quiet until the sound of laughter stopped. 1 second, the grand hall of Black Hollow Manor had pulsed with music and crystal glasses and smug voices wrapped in velvet. The next, silence stretched across the marble floor like a blade slowly being unsheathed. She stood near the far wall, fingers curled around the silver tray she had been carrying, trying to steady the tremor in her hands. Across the ballroom, Eleanor Blackwood stood at the center of attention, radiant in silver silk, her smile sharp as polished glass, while nobles circled her like moths to flame. Everything about tonight belonged to Eleanor. The admiration. The expectation. The certainty that the Alpha King would finally choose his Luna. And Violet had been foolish enough to think she could disappear into the background unnoticed. There she is, a familiar voice cut through the stillness. Lord Herrick. Tall, broad-shouldered, his grin lazy with amusement as he stepped into her path. The little ghost hiding in corners again. A ripple of soft laughter followed from the small gathering around him. Violet lowered her gaze automatically. She knew better than to answer. Silence had always been safer. Since childhood, she had learned that speaking too much only gave cruel people more pieces of her to break apart. Tell us, another woman said, swirling dark wine in her glass. Did anyone actually invite you to the royal gathering, or did you wander in by mistake? More laughter. Violet tightened her hold on the tray until the edges pressed painfully into her palms. The scent of expensive perfume and roasted meat sat heavy in the air, almost suffocating. Outside, snow tapped softly against the tall windows of the estate, the winter storm growing stronger with every passing minute. Leave her alone, Eleanor said suddenly, though the softness in her voice felt practiced, rehearsed for an audience. She approached slowly, one elegant hand resting lightly against Violet's arm. My sister means well. She simply forgets that not everyone belongs in places like this. The words landed softly, but they still cut. Violet swallowed hard. There it was again. Kindness sharpened into humiliation. The sort that smiled while reminding you exactly where you stood. Around them, several guests nodded in quiet agreement. A servant pretending to belong among wolves born for crowns. Violet forced herself to breathe through the tightness growing in her chest. I should return to the kitchen, she murmured. But Herrick stepped sideways, blocking her path again. Not yet. His eyes gleamed with something dangerous disguised as humor. We need entertainment. The storm trapped everyone here for the evening, after all. Several nobles exchanged amused glances. Someone near the fireplace laughed too loudly. Violet already knew where this was going. She could feel it in the shift of the room. The slow hunger of people searching for weakness to feed on. I heard, Herrick continued, that you spent years wandering the forest alone after your mother died. He leaned closer. Tell me, little wolf, do you still talk to stray animals? More laughter erupted. Violet's cheeks burned. The memory struck before she could stop it. Her mother kneeling in moonlit snow. A wounded hawk wrapped gently in worn blankets. Kindness costs nothing, sweetheart, but cruelty costs pieces of your soul. She had held on to those words like a lifeline ever since. Enough, Eleanor said again, though her smile never reached her eyes. Do not embarrass yourself further, Violet. But Herrick was not finished. He reached toward the tray in Violet's hands, lifting the untouched glass of mulled cider she had been delivering. Perhaps she should make herself useful, he said. Sing for us. Or better yet, tell us why the Alpha King has not looked at anyone all night. A murmur spread through the hall. Even now, the throne-like chair near the fire remained occupied by the silent stranger everyone feared. King Lucien Thornvale sat motionless beneath shadow and candlelight, one gloved hand resting against the carved armrest. He had barely spoken since arriving, barely moved. Yet somehow his presence pressed against the room harder than thunder before a storm. Violet had avoided looking at him directly all evening. There was something unsettling about him. Something familiar she could not explain. Earlier that afternoon, she had unknowingly bandaged the wounded stranger in the forest cabin, never realizing the cold silver eyes staring at her now belonged to the same man. Herrick followed her line of sight and laughed. "Do not tell me," he mocked, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "The forgotten sister thinks the Alpha King noticed her." The room erupted again. Violet felt the humiliation settle heavy inside her ribs. Hot, sharp, endless. But before she could step away, something shifted near the fire. A movement so quiet it almost went unnoticed. The scrape of wood against stone echoed softly through the hall. One by one, conversations died. Glasses lowered. Breath stalled. Because the Alpha King had risen to his feet. The sound of the chair scraping against stone echoed through the grand hall like distant thunder rolling across frozen mountains. No one breathed. No one moved. Even the musicians near the balcony lowered their hands from their instruments as if some invisible force had wrapped itself around the room and commanded silence. Violet stood perfectly still near the wall, her pulse stumbling painfully inside her chest. For one impossible second, she thought perhaps someone important had entered behind her. Perhaps the Alpha King had only risen to greet another noble family. Someone worthy. Someone expected. But when she finally gathered the courage to look up, she realized his silver eyes were already on her. Not Eleanor. Not Lord Herrick. Her. The warmth drained from Violet's hands so quickly she nearly dropped the tray. Across the ballroom, King Lucien Thornvale stood motionless beside the fire, taller somehow than he had seemed while seated. Candlelight traced sharp shadows along the lines of his dark coat, making him appear less like a man and more like something carved from winter itself. Dangerous. Unreadable. Ancient in ways she could not explain. The entire hall watched him with the same nervous stillness prey reserved for storms. Nobody interrupted an Alpha King when he stood. Nobody dared guess his intentions. Herrick shifted uneasily beside her, though the smugness had not fully left his face. "Your Majesty," he said with a strained smile, bowing too quickly. "We were only having a little fun." No response came. Lucien said nothing. Yet somehow the silence itself felt heavier than shouting ever could. His gaze never moved from Violet. Something tightened painfully inside her ribs. There it was again. That strange, impossible familiarity. The same cold silver eyes from the forest. The wounded stranger leaning against the cabin doorway while snow melted in dark strands from his coat. She remembered the warmth of blood against her fingertips as she wrapped the bandage around his shoulder. The quiet way he had watched her. The strange pause before he left without offering his name. Her stomach dropped. No, it could not be. It was impossible. Why would a king wander injured and alone through a winter forest? "Your Majesty?" Eleanor stepped forward gracefully, her silver dress catching the firelight. Her practiced smile never slipped. "Would you care for another drink?" Lucien did not even glance at her. The dismissal landed so softly most people almost missed it. But Violet saw the flicker in Eleanor's expression. Brief. Sharp. A crack beneath perfect composure. Then slowly, deliberately, the Alpha King took one step forward. The sound of his boots against marble echoed through the silent room. Another step. Then another. The crowd parted instinctively before him, nobles lowering their heads as though some old instinct older than language demanded submission. Violet's breath caught. He was walking toward her. No, not toward her. Surely not. Her fingers curled tighter around the tray. Leave, she told herself. Move. Say something. Apologize. But fear rooted her in place. Around her, whispers moved like smoke. Why is he walking over there? What is happening? Did she offend him? Herrick took an awkward half-step backward. Violet noticed it immediately. For the first time all evening, his confidence looked uncertain. Lucien stopped only a few feet away, close enough now that she could catch the scent of cedarwood and cold mountain air beneath the faint metallic edge of winter snow. Close enough that she could see the exhaustion hidden beneath his sharp expression. His shoulder, the one she had bandaged. Beneath the dark fabric of his coat, she noticed the faintest stiffness when he moved. He was still injured. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. Before fear could stop her, before reason could remind her how foolish this was, the words escaped quietly. "You should not be standing so long," she said softly. The room froze again. Complete silence. Shock flickered across several faces nearby. Violet realized too late what she had done. She had spoken directly to the Alpha King without invitation. Her face turned hot with panic. "I am sorry," she whispered quickly, lowering her eyes. "I did not mean to overstep." Nothing happened for a moment. Then, quietly enough that only she could hear, Lucien finally spoke. His voice was deep and rough around the edges, quieter than she expected. "You recognized me." Violet looked up slowly. His silver eyes held hers with unsettling steadiness. She swallowed. "The forest," she said carefully. "You were hurt." Something unreadable crossed his face then. Not surprise exactly. Something closer to relief. Around them, confusion rippled through the crowd. Nobody understood the strange exchange unfolding in front of them. Nobody understood why the Alpha King stood speaking to the forgotten girl near the wall instead of the woman everyone assumed he would choose. Violet could feel Eleanor's stare from across the room like ice pressing against her skin. But suddenly, none of it seemed to matter. Because for the first time all evening, Lucien's expression softened almost imperceptibly. And in a voice low enough that only she could hear, he asked one quiet question that made her pulse stop completely. "Why did you help the stranger in the middle of a storm when everyone else would have walked away?"